She was a broke delivery driver who biked 14 miles a day through the wealthiest zip code in Greenwich, Connecticut, just to keep her daughter fed. Every afternoon, she carried hot meals to a disabled Korean woman who couldn't grip a fork. She thought the woman was abandoned, forgotten, left to rot in a dark house by a family that didn't care. But the day that woman looked at her with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "Can you pretend to be my son today?" Tony stepped into a world she was never supposed to see. And the people who controlled that world did not forgive uninvited guests. If you leave now, you'll never find out whose wife she really was. Subscribe to Tales by Wave. This story gets dangerous before it gets beautiful. Tony Garrett checked the time on her phone. The screen had a crack running diagonally from the top left corner to the bottom right, held together by a $3 screen protector from the gas station. The delivery app showed 12 minutes to drop off, 12 minutes to bike from the restaurant on Main Street to the house on Lakeview Drive. If she made it on time, 4 stars minimum. If she was late, the algorithm buried her. Fewer orders, fewer tips, fewer dollars for Zuri's inhaler refills. Tony was 29 years old. She had a degree in nursing from Howard University that she had never used because clinicals required hours she couldn't afford after Zuri was born. She had exactly $41 in her checking account, a 5-year-old daughter who believed her mother was the strongest woman alive, and a rested Trek bicycle that made a grinding sound every time she shifted gears. She pedaled hard through the tree-lined streets of Greenwich, past the stone walls, past the iron gates, past the Teslas and the Range Rovers parked in driveways that were longer than the apartment hallway she shared with Zuri. This was old money Connecticut. Hedge fund managers, retired CEOs, people who tipped 15% on a Tuesday and thought they were generous. The house on Lakeview Drive sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was a massive colonial revival. White clapboard, black shutters, wraparound porch, probably 7 bedrooms. But something was wrong with it. The hedges were overgrown, the mailbox was stuffed so full that envelopes spilled onto the gravel. 2 of the upstairs windows had curtains drawn so tight they looked sealed. The porch light was burned out. In a neighborhood where every lawn looked like a golf course, this house looked like it was holding its breath. Tony locked her bike to the wrought iron railing, adjusted the insulated delivery bag on her shoulders, and climbed the porch steps. She checked the app. Customer, S. Yoon. Instructions, door is unlocked. Please bring food inside. I cannot come to the door. Tony hesitated. Company policy was clear. Do not enter customer homes. Liability, deactivation risk. She had read the horror stories online, drivers who walked in and got accused of theft, drivers who got fired for crossing the threshold. But she also read the instruction again. I cannot come to the door. Not, I don't want to. Cannot. She thought about her grandmother in Baltimore, how she spent the last 2 years of her life unable to get out of bed, waiting for someone, anyone, to knock. Tony pushed the door open. "Hello?" she called into the dim hallway. The air inside was cool but stale. It smelled like jasmine tea and dust and something medicinal, maybe rubbing alcohol. The floors were dark hardwood, expensive but scuffed in a track pattern that ran from the hallway to the living room. Wheelchair tracks. "In here," the voice came from the left. It was thin, accented, and very tired. Tony stepped into the living room. The curtains were drawn. A single lamp burned on a side table cluttered with prescription bottles, tissues, and a framed photograph lying face down. In the center of the room, positioned near the cold fireplace, sat a Korean woman in a motorized wheelchair. She looked to be in her late 50s, though her face carried the kind of exhaustion that ages people beyond their years. Her black hair was streaked with silver, pulled into a loose bun. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers curled inward, barely moving. "I have your order, ma'am," Tony said softly, lifting the bag. "Miso soup and rice." "Thank you," the woman said. She didn't turn her head fully. Her neck moved slowly, as if every degree of rotation cost her something. "Can you set it on the table?" Tony placed the containers down and started to unpack them. Steam curled from the soup when she peeled the lid. She glanced at the woman's hands, the curled fingers, the slight tremor. The woman stared at the food the way a person stares at a locked door when they've lost the key. Would you like me to open everything for you? Tony asked. Her jaw tightened. I can manage. She couldn't manage. Tony watched her try to grip the plastic spoon. Her fingers closed around it, held for 2 seconds, then spasmed. The spoon dropped onto the wheelchair armrest and bounced to the floor. The woman closed her eyes. A sound came from her throat. Not a cry, not a word. Something between surrender and rage. Just leave it. I'll figure it out later. She wouldn't figure it out later. They both knew that. Tony's phone buzzed. New order available. Pick up in 6 minutes. If she left now, she could make the next delivery on time. She could protect her rating. She could earn the extra $8 she needed for Zuri's field trip money due tomorrow morning. Tony silenced her phone and put it in her pocket. She picked up the spoon, wiped it with a napkin, and pulled a wooden chair next to the wheelchair. My daughter Zuri is 5. She won't eat anything unless I tell her a story while she eats. Last week, I had to pretend the broccoli was a tiny tree from a fairy kingdom. She ate the whole plate. The woman opened her eyes. I'm not doing the fairy kingdom thing for you, though, unless you really want me to. Something cracked in her expression. Not sadness, relief. The kind of relief that comes when someone treats you like a person instead of a problem. I think I can skip the fairy kingdom, the woman said quietly, a ghost of a smile. Open up, Tony said gently. She fed her, slowly, without rushing, without checking her phone, without looking at the woman like she was fragile or broken or less than. Tony sat in that dark living room in her delivery uniform, black leggings, gray hoodie, beat-up sneakers, and fed a stranger until the soup was gone and the rice was finished. Thank you, the woman said when it was done. Her eyes were wet. My name is Suman. Tony, I'll see you tomorrow, Suman. You don't have to come back. I know, Tony said. I'll see you tomorrow. She was late for her next 2 deliveries. She lost $11 in tips. She went home that night and counted the money in the jar on top of the refrigerator. Not enough for the field trip. She told Zuri the school moved it to next week. But the next afternoon, when the order from S. Yoon appeared on her screen, Tony took it. It became a rhythm. Every day at 1:15, Tony arrived at the house on Lakeview Drive. She brought Sumin her lunch. Sometimes soup, sometimes bibimbap from the Korean place on Elm Street, sometimes just a smoothie when Sumin's throat was too tight to swallow solid food. She sat in the wooden chair. She fed her. They talked. Sumin told her she had multiple sclerosis, that her body was slowly forgetting how to obey her, that some days her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and some days her hands worked just enough to press the wheelchair controls, and some days they didn't work at all, and she sat in the dark for hours, waiting for the automated lights to turn on at sunset. What about your family? Tony asked one Thursday, scraping the last of the rice from the container. This house is huge. Someone should be here with you. Sumin's face changed. A wall went up behind her eyes, fast and clean, like a steel door dropping. My husband is a busy man, she said, her voice flat. He has responsibilities. Too busy to feed his wife? Too busy to sit in a room with someone who reminds him of what he's lost. Tony didn't push. She recognized that tone. It was the tone of a woman who had rehearsed her answers so many times they no longer sounded like pain. They sounded like facts. She showed Sumin pictures of Zuri on her cracked phone. Zuri in her school uniform, Zuri grinning with a missing front tooth, Zuri asleep on the couch, clutching a stuffed elephant. She's beautiful, Sumin said, and her voice broke on the word. She has your strength, Tony. I can see it. She has my stubbornness, Tony laughed. That's for sure. 3 weeks into their routine, Tony arrived to find Sumin sitting in the dark as usual, but something was different. The photograph on the side table, the one that was always face down, was propped upright. It showed a young Korean man, maybe 19 or 20, with sharp cheekbones, a wide smile, and his arm around Sumin. She looked 10 years younger in the photo. She looked alive. Who's that? Tony asked carefully. Sumin stared at the photograph for a long time. Junho, she said. My son. Where is he? Gone. The word sat between them like a stone dropped into still water. 2 years ago, Sumin continued, her voice thin as paper. He was 22. Tony set the food down. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. The way Suman said gone told her everything. It wasn't a departure. It was an ending. Then Suman turned to her. Her eyes were red and wet and desperate and fierce all at once. The words came out like something she'd been holding behind her teeth for months. "Can you pretend to be my son today?" Tony's breath caught. Not literally," Suman said quickly, her voice cracking. "I know that sounds insane. Today is his birthday. He would have been 24. And every year I sit here alone and I talk to the photograph and I pretend he can hear me. But today I can't do it alone. I just need someone to sit with me, someone who chose to be here. Can you just sit with me and let me pretend, just for 1 hour, that I still have a child who visits?" Tony's eyes burned. She thought of Zuri. She thought of what it would feel like to lose her, to have nothing left but a photograph in an empty room and a birthday no one else remembered. She pulled the chair closer. She took Suman's curled hand, gently, and held it. "Tell me about him," Tony said. And Suman did. She talked for 40 minutes. She told Tony that Junho loved basketball and hated math, that he cooked better than her, that he used to carry her up the stairs when her legs failed before they installed the elevator, that he had a laugh so loud the neighbors complained, that the last thing he ever said to her was, "I'll be home by 10, Amma." He never came home. Tony didn't check her phone. She didn't leave. She sat and listened until Suman's voice gave out and the room was quiet. "Thank you," Suman whispered. "Same time tomorrow." A mother who lost her only son. A stranger who chose to stay. If that doesn't hit your chest, nothing will. Subscribe to Tales by Wave, because the truth of who this woman really is will shake you. But Tony started noticing things. Small things at first. The kind of details that only matter when you see the full picture. The house on Lakeview Drive was massive, easily a $12 million property, but Sue Min ordered cheap takeout every day. The prescriptions on the side table were name-brand medications that cost thousands a month, but there was no nurse, no aide, no caretaker. The furniture was custom Italian leather, the kind Tony recognized from the design magazines she used to flip through in waiting rooms. The art on the walls wasn't decoration. It was real. Oil paintings in heavy frames with tiny brass plaques she couldn't read from a distance. One afternoon, while Sue Min dozed off in her wheelchair after lunch, Tony stood to stretch and walked toward the hallway bathroom. She passed a half-open door she had never noticed before. Inside was an office, dark mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a massive oil portrait hanging behind the desk. It showed a Korean man in his early 60s, silver-haired, wearing a dark suit with a crimson tie. His jaw was hard. His eyes were cold. He didn't look like someone who smiled often. He looked like someone other people smiled for. Beneath the portrait, on the desk, sat a black leather briefcase with gold clasps. Engraved on the clasp in small block letters, Kang Dae-ho. Tony had never heard the name, but the way the room was arranged, like a throne room more than an office, made her skin prickle. She walked back to the living room. Sue Min was awake, watching her with an expression Tony couldn't read. "The bathroom is the next door down," Sue Min said calmly. Too calmly. "Sorry, I wasn't snooping." "I know you weren't. But Tony, that room, don't go in there again." It wasn't a request. It was a warning. And the look in Sue Min's eyes wasn't fear, it was protection. The same look Tony gave Zuri when the crossing guard wasn't paying attention. That evening, Tony biked home through the autumn dark and couldn't shake the feeling that the house on Lakeview Drive was bigger than it looked. Not in size, in depth. Like there were rooms behind the rooms and stories behind the stories, and Sue Min was sitting at the center of something Tony couldn't see the edges of. She walked into a room she wasn't supposed to see, and the woman she trusted just warned her like her life depended on it. If you're not subscribed to Tales by Wave, you're going to miss the moment everything unravels. Don't say I didn't warn you. 2 weeks later, Tony's world broke. It didn't break slowly. It broke all at once, the way glass does. One crack and then 1,000 pieces on the floor. It started on Monday. Zuri woke up at 3 in the morning, wheezing so badly Tony could hear the whistle from the kitchen. She grabbed the emergency inhaler. Empty. She had been meaning to refill it, but the copay was $65 she didn't have until Thursday's payout. She wrapped Zuri in a blanket and biked 6 miles to the urgent care clinic on Post Road. They gave Zuri a nebulizer treatment and handed Tony a bill for $430. When they came outside, the bike was gone. Chain cut clean. No bike, no transportation, no way to deliver. Tuesday morning, Tony called the delivery company. She explained the situation. The representative was polite and efficient and completely unhelpful. You missed your scheduled shift window. Your account has been placed on a 48-hour hold pending review. The review took 5 days. She was deactivated by Wednesday. Thursday afternoon, her landlord taped an eviction warning to the door, 7 days to pay $1,200 or vacate. Tony sat on the kitchen floor after Zuri fell asleep and stared at the ceiling and did the math she already knew. There was no math that worked. There was no angle, no hustle, no miracle. She had $18, a daughter with asthma, no bike, no job, and 7 days. But Friday afternoon, Tony did something that made no financial sense. She walked. She walked 4 miles from her apartment to the Korean restaurant on Elm Street, ordered Soo Min's usual miso soup and rice, paid for it with her own money, $9.40, and walked 3 more miles to Lakeview Drive. She arrived sweating, aching, carrying the food in a plastic bag because she'd already returned the insulated delivery backpack. She knocked on the door instead of walking in. She didn't know why. Something felt different. "Come in," Soo Min called. Tony stepped inside. She set the food down, she pulled the chair over, she opened the container. Soo Min looked at her, really looked at her. "No uniform," she said quietly. "No bag. No bike." Her eyes moved across Tony's face, reading what Tony was trying to hide. "What happened?" Tony tried to say it calmly. She tried to say it like a fact, the way Soo Min talked about her family. But her voice broke on the first word, and after that, there was no stopping it. She told Soo Min everything. Zuri's asthma attack, the stolen bike, the deactivation, the eviction notice. "This is the last meal I can bring you. I paid for this one myself. I needed to make sure you ate today. I didn't want to just disappear." She picked up the spoon. "One last lunch. Let's make it count." She fed Soo Min slowly, the way she always did. Neither of them spoke. The room was so quiet, Tony could hear the clock on the mantelpiece ticking. When the soup was done, Tony wiped Soo Min's chin, cleaned the containers, and stood up. She leaned down and kissed Soo Min on the forehead. "Take care of yourself, Soo Min." She turned toward the door. "Tony, stop." The voice was different. Not thin, not tired. It was the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime being obeyed. Tony stopped. "Open the curtains." She'd just lost everything, her job, her home, her daughter's safety, and now the woman she trusted just warned her like her life depended on it. If you're not subscribed to Tales by Wave, you're about to miss the biggest twist Tales by Wave has ever told. Don't say I didn't warn you. Soo Min, the light. Open them. Tony walked to the massive window. The curtains were heavy, thick, velvet, charcoal gray, the kind that blocked all light. She found the cord and pulled. Sunlight crashed into the room like a wave. Tony squinted and stumbled back. When her eyes adjusted, she gasped. The window didn't face a yard. It faced a private estate garden that stretched for what looked like an acre. Manicured hedges, a koi pond, a marble fountain, and beyond that, a circular driveway where 3 black SUVs with tinted windows sat parked in a row. Each vehicle had the same small emblem on the door, a silver dragon coiled around a sword. Tony spun around. The room she'd been sitting in for weeks wasn't what she thought. In the light, she could see what the darkness had hidden. The oil paintings weren't just expensive, they were museum pieces. The furniture was handcrafted. The rug beneath the wheelchair was Persian, probably worth more than Tony's entire apartment building. I don't understand, Tony said. You order $9 soup. You sit in the dark. I choose to sit in the dark, Sumin said. Her posture had changed. Even in the wheelchair, even with her curled hands and her silver-streaked hair, she looked like someone who once commanded rooms. There is a difference. Who are you? My name is Su-Min Kang, not Yoon. I used my mother's family name on the delivery app for safety. Tony felt her legs weaken. Kang, like the briefcase in the office. Like my husband, Kang De-ho. The name meant nothing to Tony, but the way Su-Min said it, slowly, carefully, the way people handle things that might explode, told her everything about the weight of it. My husband, continued Su-Min, built an empire that stretches from Seoul to Manhattan to Los Angeles. Import-export is what the newspapers call it. What they don't call it is what pays for this house, those cars, and the security team that watches this property from a building across the street. Security team? Tony felt cold. They've known about you since your first visit. They ran your name, your social security number, your daughter's school registration, your lease agreement. They know everything about you, Tony. Tony's chest tightened. The room that had felt like a quiet sanctuary for months suddenly felt like the inside of a cage. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to know if you were real. Sumin's voice cracked, and for a moment, the powerful woman disappeared and the grieving mother returned. After Junho died, my husband disappeared into his world. He sends money, he sends staff, he sends doctors and nurses and private chefs. But he cannot sit in this room and look at me because I remind him of the son we lost. Her eyes were fierce and wet. So I fired everyone. All of them, every nurse who checked their watch while I choked on water, every chef who left the food on the counter and walked out, every assistant who treated me like a line item on a budget. She looked at Tony. I started ordering food deliveries, hundreds of them, different apps, different restaurants, different drivers. Do you know how many people brought food to this door in 6 months? Tony shook her head. 347 drivers. Every single one left the bag on the porch and walked away. Some didn't even ring the bell. You were the only one who came inside, the only one who saw the instructions and thought about the person behind them, the only one who sat down and fed me like I was a human being and not a delivery stop. Tony's tears fell before she could stop them. She nodded toward the side table. Open the bottom drawer. Tony's hands trembled as she pulled it open. Inside was a cream-colored envelope, thick and heavy. Open it. A cashier's check. Tony read the number 3 times because her brain refused to accept it the first 2. $75,000. I can't take this, Tony said immediately. That is not charity, Sumin said firmly. That is compensation. You provided daily personal care for 4 months. At a licensed home health aid rate in Connecticut, that is what you are owed. If anything, it is less than you deserve. Sumin! I am not finished. Her voice carried the authority of a woman who had spent decades beside one of the most powerful men in the country. I called Greenwich Country Day Academy this morning. Zuri is enrolled for the spring semester, full tuition scholarship through a foundation I manage. I also called Dr. Priya Anand at Yale New Haven Hospital. She is the top pediatric pulmonologist in the state. Zuri has an appointment next Tuesday. No copay, no bill. Tony's knees buckled. She grabbed the arm of the chair to keep from falling. And I need you, Sumin continued, her voice softer now. Not as a delivery driver, as my personal companion, a real one, someone who feeds me without flinching, someone who talks to me like a person, someone who held my hand on my dead son's birthday and didn't ask for anything in return. She paused. The salary is $120,000 a year, full medical benefits, a company car, and a two-bedroom apartment in the guest cottage on this property, so Zuri has a yard to play in. Tony sank to her knees, the envelope pressed against her chest. She cried, deep, shaking sobs that came from the same place where she kept the fear about rent and inhalers and whether Zuri would have to change schools again. "Why?" she choked. "Why me?" "Because you didn't know," Suman whispered. "You thought I was poor. You thought I was abandoned, and you spent your last $9 on soup for me anyway." She smiled, a real smile, the first one Tony had ever seen from her that reached her eyes. Kindness that only shows up when there is a reward is not kindness. It is strategy. What you gave me was real, and real is the only currency I trust anymore. She spent her last dollar feeding a stranger she thought was forgotten. That stranger turned out to be married to the most dangerous man on the East Coast. The world doesn't reward kindness like this every day, but this story proves it can. If Tales by Wave hasn't earned your subscribe by now, drop a comment and tell me what's holding you back. I genuinely want to know. Tony wiped her face. She stood up slowly, still holding the envelope, still trying to breathe. "There's something else you should know," Suman said, and her tone shifted again. Heavier, more careful. "My husband knows about you. He has known for months. And last week, for the first time since Junho died, he asked me a question about you." "What question?" "He asked if you were trustworthy." Suman held her gaze. "I told him you were the most trustworthy person I have ever met." And Tony, when a man like Daeho asks whether someone is trustworthy, it is because he intends to trust them. That means something in his world. It means protection, but it also means you are inside now, and the inside has rules. Tony felt the weight of it. Not just the money, not just the job, the gravity of what she had walked into, a family that operated in shadows, a woman who had chosen her out of hundreds, a world where kindness was currency and loyalty was oxygen, and the price for both was higher than she could calculate standing in this sunlit room. "Are you saying I'm in danger?" "I'm saying you're in a family," Suman said, "and in this family, those two things have never been very far apart." Tony looked at the photograph of Junho on the side table. 22 years old, wide smile, never came home. She looked at the SUVs in the driveway, the silver dragon on the doors. She looked at Sumin, the woman who had lost everything and still had the strength to sit in a dark room and wait for someone real. Tony sat back down. She picked up the spoon. She opened the second container of rice she had brought, the one she had meant to eat herself on the walk home. "I'll take the job," Tony said, "but I have one condition." "Name it." "Tomorrow is Saturday. Zuri doesn't have school. I'm bringing her with me, and you're going to let her do the airplane noises." Suman laughed. It was weak and raspy and raw, and it was the most beautiful sound in the room. "Deal," Suman whispered. "Deal." Tony gave her last $9 to feed a woman she thought was forgotten. She didn't know that woman's husband controlled half the ports on the East Seaboard. She didn't know she had been watched, vetted, and chosen. She didn't know that the dark house on Lakeview Drive was a test that 346 people before her had failed. She just knew a woman was hungry, and that was enough. But Suman's words hung in the air long after the curtains opened. In this family, danger and belonging have never been very far apart. Tony had stepped through a door she could not step back through. She had been seen by people who never forgot a face. And the man whose portrait hung in that mahogany office, the man with the cold eyes and the crimson tie, had just learned the name of the woman who made his wife laugh for the first time in 2 years. What he planned to do with that name? That is a story for another day. If this story touched something in your chest, please like, share, and subscribe to Tales by Wave for more stories that remind you the world still has good people in it. And the ones who don't subscribe, I'll be here when you change your mind.